With the advancements in science and technology, the treatment of mental disorders has been demystified to simple psychotherapy sessions. But that wasn't the case a few centuries ago. Back in the day, any person deemed mad was simply locked up and left to die in deplorable conditions. Practical as it may sound, this approach seemed to have its own limitation. That is, when the madman or woman in question happens to be the most powerful person in the empire. Today's episode narrates the life stories and bizarre behavior of 10 mad monarchs in history. Number 10. Caligula, Emperor of Rome. Caligula became Emperor of Rome in March of 37 AD, following the death of his uncle and adoptive father, Emperor Tiberius. Ascending the throne at age 24, Caligula was highly admired by the Roman public. During his coronation, the crowd hailed him as our baby, our star, our rising sun, our hero, and many other sweet nicknames. The first few months of his reign were remarkably blissful. He freed political prisoners who had been sentenced by his uncle for treason and organized spectacles to entertain the Roman public. He also reimbursed businesses impacted by the extortionist imperial taxes and raised the salaries of civil servants. Within 3 months, over 160,000 animals were sacrificed by Roman citizens to bless his reign. But 7 months into his reign, the baby star suddenly transformed into a monster. He started by executing people close to him and those he perceived as a potential threat, including his adopted son Tiberius Gemellus. When his grandmother, Antonia Minor, got enraged, she was murdered, allegedly poisoned on the emperor's orders. Caligula also executed his father-in-law Marcus Junius Silanus and his brother-in-law Marcus Lepidus and exiled his younger sisters Livilla and Agrippina. He only spared his uncle Claudius because he preferred to keep him as a laughingstock. 3 years into his reign, Caligula began referring to himself as a god and had the heads removed from various statues of Roman gods and replaced them with his own. He would appear in public and laugh about men whose wives he had slept with and had made fun of his incestuous relationships with his sisters. Once at a gladiatorial game, he ordered the imperial guards to throw an entire section of the audience into the arena to be devoured by wild beasts because he was bored and there were no prisoners left to be used. When he appointed his horse, Incitatus, to the rank of consul, the people felt they had had enough of his madness. In January 41 AD, Caligula was assassinated by the Praetorian Guard, led by Cassius Chaerea. Sources say Caligula's sudden mental disorder was caused by a magical potion used to cure him of a brief illness he suffered shortly after his coronation. Whether Caligula was truly mad or just very cruel has been a subject of debate amongst modern historians. Number 9. Charles VI, King of France. Charles VI, also known as Charles le Fou or Charles the Mad, became King of France in September 1380 at age 11, following the death of his father, King Charles V. Being a minor, his uncles, who acted as regents, squandered the kingdom's financial resources and levied heavy taxes on French subjects. But the young king soon ended the regency, restored power to the more competent advisors who ran the affairs of the state with integrity. France transitioned into a new era of peace and unity, earning him the nickname Charles the Beloved. A few years later, Charles, then in his mid-20s, began experiencing psychosis with severe symptoms of delusions, hallucinations, and incoherent speech. His first known incident of mental disorder occurred during a military campaign in July 1392. Surrounded by his own guards, the king suddenly yelled, "Kill the traitors," and began swinging his sword at his companions, killing one of his knights and wounding many soldiers before his chamberlain and a group of royal guards were able to grab and pin him to the ground. A year later, he could not remember his name and didn't even know he was a king. When the queen came to his chambers, he asked her who she was and then ordered his servants to take care of her needs so she could leave him alone. By 1395, he claimed he was Saint George, a Greek soldier in the Roman army who was sentenced to death almost 1,000 years earlier for refusing to recant his Christian faith. Because he would run wild in the corridors of his Parisian residence, the entrances were walled up to prevent him from running into the streets. At this time, he could recognize a few of his palace officials, but not his wife and children. In 1405, he refused to bathe or change his clothes for 6 months and had iron rods sewn into his clothes for fear that he would break. He believed his body was made of glass. Periods of mental illness continued throughout the king's life until his death in October 1422 at age 53. Before his death, he had disinherited his son and heir Charles and made Henry V, the King of England, heir to the French throne. Number 8. Maria I, Queen of Portugal. Maria I, also known as Maria the Pious, was the first undisputed Queen Regent of Portugal, the first monarch of Brazil, and the first woman to hold absolute authority in both countries, reigning as a monarch in her own rights, equivalent in rank and title as a king. Maria started showing signs of melancholia from childhood, a mental condition characterized by severe depression and hallucinations. 2 of Maria's sisters had similar conditions. This was believed to be due to their incestuous ancestry, as marriage between blood relatives was very common with the Braganza dynasty. In 1760, Maria married her father's direct younger brother, Peter, for whom she bore 6 children. The queen's mental condition grew worse over time. By 1786, she suffered major depressive disorder and forbade any court entertainment, claiming that they resembled religious ceremonies. In February 1792, she was deemed mentally insane and declared unfit to rule. Maria's eldest son had died of smallpox, so her second son took over the government in her stead. The queen was moved to a royal guest house in Queluz, where she would lie in her apartment all day. Servants and visitors would complain of terrible screams that would echo throughout the building. Maria's dementia was so severe that she feared that she would be tortured by her own servants. When Spain invaded Portugal in 1801, the entire royal household had to flee to Brazil. Maria was heard screaming throughout the trip in her carriage in the middle of the crowd. Maria lived in Brazil for 8 years, always in a state of psychiatric disability, and died at 81. Number 7. Christian VII, King of Denmark and Norway. Christian was a Danish monarch who ruled as King of Denmark and Norway from 1766 to 1808. Though he had a winning personality from his early years, he was a slow learner. He was frequently flogged by a brutal tutor, Frederick Reventlow, who was probably under undue pressure to groom the future king. Modern historians believe that this may have caused severe emotional problems that eventually resulted in the king's schizophrenia, a mental disorder characterized by delusions and paranoia. Coupled with the pressure of governing the country, Christian's mental disorder became more pronounced when he became king at age 16. Court physicians were alarmed by Christian's frequent masturbation, hallucinations, and self-mutilation. When the young king got betrothed to his 15-year-old cousin, Caroline Matilda, sister of King George III of England, the English princess was anxious about the marriage, not knowing the bridegroom was mentally ill. The wedding took place on November 8, 1766, shortly after which Christian abandoned himself to the worst excesses, especially sexual promiscuity. They were divorced 5 years later. Christian's disorganized thinking, another major symptom of the affliction, resulted in the most irrational policy decisions the country had ever known. As such, he was only a nominal king for most parts of his reign. His stepmother, Queen Juliane Marie, acted as regent until 1784, when the king's first son, Prince Frederick, turned 16, took over the regency, and eventually succeeded Christian after his death in 1808 at age 59. Number 6. Talal bin Abdullah, King of Jordan. Talal became King of Jordan in July 1951, following the assassination of his father, King Abdullah I. On January 11, 1952, barely 6 months into his reign, Talal established a modern constitution of Jordan, redefining the hereditary monarchic rules, separating the powers of the state into executive, legislative, and judicial, and most importantly, transforming his kingdom into a constitutional monarchy. This has been one of the most revered achievements in the history of Jordanian kings. Unfortunately, shortly afterward, Talal was reported by the British ambassador to Jordan, Geoffrey Furlong, his wife Queen Zine, and the Jordanian Prime Minister, Tawfiq Abu al-Huda, as suffering from a severe mental illness. In one incident on May 29, 1952, Talal is said to have threatened Queen Zine with a knife and attempted to kill one of his younger children, causing the Queen to seek refuge at the British embassy. With continued reports of his violent behavior, Prime Minister Abu al-Huda tried to talk Talal into abdicating, but received harsh reproach from the king. In a desperate attempt to restore the king's faculties, Talal was secretly flown to a medical clinic in Paris for treatment. Shortly after his return, government officials received reports that the king was negotiating with a private militia to overthrow his government. At that point, it became clear that his madness was irrevocable. This led the Prime Minister to summon the parliament to an extraordinary session, during which King Talal was deposed for medical reasons. The deposed king was succeeded by his eldest son Hussein bin Talal. Number 5. Carlota, Empress of Mexico. Carlota was Empress Consort of Mexico from April 1864 to May 1867. By birth, Carlota was a Belgian princess and a daughter of King Leopold I of Belgium. When her husband Archduke Maximilian of Austria was proclaimed by Emperor Napoleon III as the figurehead of the French Empire in Mexico, the couple moved to their new empire and Carlota became the Empress Consort of Mexico. During her early years, Carlota never showed any signs of insanity, but without a child from the marriage, her husband decided to adopt the grandsons of Agustin de Iturbide, a Mexican army general and politician. He conferred royal titles on the boys without Carlota's consent. Maximilian went further to publish the adoption treaty in European newspapers, thereby preventing Carlota or anyone else from reversing the adoption. This resulted in a nervous breakdown, and Carlota began manifesting symptoms of paranoia and severe depression. Meanwhile, her husband continued to face fierce resistance from an overwhelming majority of Mexican people who opposed foreign rule. While on a mission to Paris to seek French support to suppress the Mexican rebels, Carlota's husband was overthrown and executed. At that time, Carlota showed further signs of deteriorating mental health. She was brought back to Belgium and confined at the Boekhout Castle in Mies, where she remained for 48 years in a deplorable mental state until her passing in 1927 at age 86. Number 4. Otto, King of Bavaria. Otto became King of Bavaria in June 1886 following the death of his elder brother Ludwig II. Otto was born in April 1848. He was the second son of King Maximilian II of Bavaria and the younger brother of Ludwig II of Bavaria. At age 15, Otto joined the Bavarian army as a sub-lieutenant, and at age 22, he fought alongside Prussia in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. Young Otto was severely traumatized by his experience on the battlefield and suffered from depression and insomnia. Otto had spells during which he slept poorly for days and acted out with violent arm and leg movements during sleep. Even before his ascension to the throne, Otto was mentally incapacitated. Therefore, his uncle acted as regent, leading most of the procession during the coronation ceremony. Otto's head was so messed up that he did not even understand the proclamation of his ascension to the throne. Everything had to be explained to him the day after his coronation. Otto thought it was his uncle who was being crowned king. Doctors later confirmed that he was mentally ill. As time went on, his situation grew worse. During a Corpus Christi Mass in 1875 in the Frauenkirche Church of Munich, Otto rushed into the church wearing hunting clothes. He fell on his knees in front of the celebrant, Archbishop Gregor von Scheer, asking for forgiveness of his sins. The Mass was interrupted, and Otto had to be led out by 2 church ministers. Otto was later moved to the Schleißheim Palace and held in isolation until his passing in October 1916 at age 68. Researchers have also argued that Otto's mental illness was partly caused by syphilis, which accounts for the paralysis and other physical problems he suffered in the latter part of his life. Number 3. George III, King of Great Britain and Ireland. George became King of Great Britain and Ireland in October 1760 at age 22, succeeding his grandfather King George II, as his own father Frederick, Prince of Wales, had died 9 years earlier. George was born 2 months prematurely. Though he survived, he grew into a reserved and shy child. 2 weeks before his coronation, George married Princess Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, whom he first met on their wedding day. Unlike his predecessors, George never took a mistress. The couple had 15 children, 9 sons and 6 daughters. They enjoyed a happy marriage until his mental illness struck. Later in their marriage, the king started showing signs of acute mania, characterized by increased agitation, unusual talkativeness, and an exaggerated sense of self-confidence. By 1788, he had become seriously deranged. At the end of the parliamentary session, he went to Cheltenham Spa in Gloucestershire to recuperate. It was the first time the king had gone 100 miles out of London, but his condition only grew worse. He would speak for many hours without pause, causing him to foam at the mouth and his voice to become hoarse. The king's vocabulary became more and more complex, and he would repeat himself over and over. On one occasion, he shook hands with a tree, believing the tree to be the King of Prussia. At this, the court physicians were totally at a loss to explain what had become of the king. In 1810, his favorite daughter, Princess Amelia, died at age 27, causing further distress to the king. By the end of that year, George was dangerously ill with full-blown bipolar disorder and was virtually blind with cataracts. The following year, the king was pronounced permanently insane. He lived in seclusion at Windsor Castle, while his son George, Prince of Wales, ruled as Prince Regent until the king's death in 1820, at age 81. Number 2. Ivan the Terrible, Emperor of Russia. Ivan the Terrible, or Ivan the Fearsome, was the first Tsar of all Russia from 1547 to 1584. Ivan initially succeeded his father, Vasily, as Grand Duchy of Moscow at age 3. With Moscow being the most dominant state in Russia, he later declared himself Emperor of all Russia in 1547 at age 16, thereby conquering all the medieval states in Russia into a united empire under his rule. The early parts of Ivan's reign were remarkably peaceful and full of progressive reforms. He implemented a new law code, liquidating the aristocracy's judicial privileges, and introduced self-governance to rural regions. He founded a standing army known as the Streltsy, which recruited from amongst the free tradespeople and the rural population and carried out military, local police, and fire brigade functions. He established Zemsky Sobor, the first Russian parliament of feudal states, with representatives of common people, and harmonized ritual and ecclesiastical practices throughout the realm. Ivan was undoubtedly a devout and intelligent person until the death of his first wife, Anastasia Romanovna, in 1560, allegedly by poison. At the same time, one of Ivan's trusted advisors, Prince Andrei Kurbsky, defected to the Lithuanians and led the Lithuanian troops against Russia. This resulted in a complete distrust for nobility, coupled with multiple allegations of embezzlement and treasonous acts committed by the noblemen and the clergy. He resorted to torturing and murdering random members of princely families throughout Russia on a vague accusation of conspiracy and treason. In 1570, he grew suspicious that the noblemen of Novgorod were planning to surrender the city to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Though there was no clear evidence of that effect, he invaded the city and killed over 3,000 people, approximately 20% of the town's population. Ivan was also prone to paranoia, melancholy, and rage, resulting in episodes of psychiatric disorders that prompted him to commit atrocious acts that earned him the nickname Ivan the Terrible. His madness was not only felt by the nobles, but also by his blood relatives and those who worked for him. In 1581, Ivan beat his pregnant daughter-in-law, Yelena Sheremeteva, for wearing indecent clothing, resulting in a miscarriage. Upon hearing this, Ivan's son Ivan Ivanovich engaged him in a heated argument that resulted in Ivan killing his son and heir by striking him with his pointed staff. After constructing the St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow, Ivan is reported to have been so impressed with the structure that he had the architect Postnik Yakovlev blinded so that he would never design anything as beautiful again. Ivan died from a stroke in 1584 while playing chess at age 53. He was succeeded by his weak-minded middle son, Fyodor. Ivan's terribleness made him one of the most feared monarchs in history. His rage and notorious outbursts helped redefine the position of the Tsar as one accountable to no one but to God alone. Future Tsars enjoyed the same absolutism up till the late 19th century. As we get to the top of our list, the most insane monarch in history, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Number 1. Nebuchadnezzar II, King of Babylon. The history of mad kings dates back to the Bible era, with the story of Nebuchadnezzar, who is presumably the ancestor of all mad monarchs. Nebuchadnezzar was the second king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, ruling it from the death of his father, Nabopolassar, in 605 BC up to his own death in 562 BC. Before his ascension to the throne, Nebuchadnezzar had built a reputation for himself as a great military leader, using his father's army to inflict a crushing defeat on the Assyrian and the Egyptian troops in the Battle of Carchemish in 605, and making Babylon the dominant power in the ancient Near East. According to the biblical book of Jeremiah, Nebuchadnezzar was a cruel ruler, appointed and used by God as a divine weapon to punish the Jews for their disobedience. When King Zedekiah refused to pay him tribute, Nebuchadnezzar invaded and destroyed the kingdom of Judah and its capital Jerusalem, with the city's population taken hostage and deported to Babylon. However, after his numerous military victories and architectural accomplishments, Nebuchadnezzar became boastful and indulged in excessive self-glorification. In the book of Daniel chapter 4 verse 30, Nebuchadnezzar is reported to have said, "This is the great Babylon that I built myself, by my own strength and might, and for the glory of my majesty." Such comments were printed on all the bricks used for his construction projects. He openly refused God's supremacy. As a result, he was punished by God and lost his sanity for 7 years. According to the book of Daniel, chapter 4, verse 33, the king was driven away from mankind into the wild, where he ate grass like goats, and his skin became wet with the dew of the heavens until his body grew hair as long as eagle's feathers and his nails as long as bird's claws. Though Nebuchadnezzar has the most horrifying story of royal insanity, he survived his 7-year madness and regained his faculties. He then acknowledged Jehovah as King of Kings, and his reign was restored. At the time of his death in 562 BC, Nebuchadnezzar was the longest reigning king of the Chaldean dynasty, ruling for 43 years and was the most powerful ruler the world had ever known. Thank you for watching. If you have a video idea, why not leave a comment below? And if we make it, we'll give you a big shout out. And please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more videos on crime stories, notorious outlaws, and historical scandals.